In this video, I'll be discussing the 10 things that I believe Pokémon GO desperately needs. This game has seen many improvements and additions over the years, but by no means do I think the game is feature complete. There are so many ways Niantic could improve this game, and some of those things are rarely discussed, so hopefully I can drive some dialogue because I would love for this game to last several more years. Anyway, let's get right into it. Here are the things that would vastly improve Pokémon GO when added. Number 1. Cowboy Hat Caterpie and Ash Hat Primate. I'm kidding. Number 1. Add the missing Pokemon from older generations. As of me recording this video, we are still missing about 55 Pokemon and Pokemon forms from Generation 3 to Generation 6. Niantic has historically staggered Pokemon releases to their benefit, but the fact that Generation 3 came out a few years ago and we still don't have Kecleon in the game is rather ridiculous. The Pokémon GO community is ready to move on from past generations, and it goes without saying that Niantic should release all of the remaining Pokémon from past generations sooner than later. Now, I'm not suggesting that Niantic release all remaining Pokémon in one go. I do like the idea of releasing certain Pokemon with different features that center around the theme of that Pokemon. I'm pretty sure the reason why Kecleon hasn't been released yet is because Niantic is waiting until AR mapping is in a good place for them to release it. Regardless, I do think they need to expedite these features so that these outdated past Pokemon don't lose their hype after being on the back burner for too long. Number 2. New ways for you to be able to show off your Pokemon collection to other players. Remember that Pokémon GO is a collecting game first and foremost. Just about everything you do in this game is about claiming the absolute best of the best shinies, legendaries, and rares, and using them for various activities like the GO Battle League or raids. Think of it like a glorified stamp collecting game. Now, part of the fun of a collection-based game is the aspect of showing off and comparing your collection with other players. This is one area where I really feel Pokémon GO, probably the ultimate collection-based game, is severely lacking. Currently, there are 2 ways you can show off your Pokémon to other players in-game. Your buddy Pokémon appearing on your friends list, and having certain Pokémon defending gyms. Now, the latter method was probably the best way you could show off your collection back in the early days of Pokémon GO, whereas you could take over all of the gyms in your neighborhood and throw in a rare Pokémon in each one. I remember certain players having a collection of high-level Dragonites defending multiple gyms, instantly becoming the envy of the town. Number 3. New gameplay modes. Like I mentioned earlier, there are a handful of activities you can do with the Pokemon in your collection. Currently, this includes gym battling, gym defense, raiding, Team Go Rocket, the buddy system, and the Go Battle League. Some of these activities are done by players on a daily basis, while others are completely ignored altogether unless a special research task requires you to do it. I think it's about time Niantic released some sort of new gameplay that would get players engaged. Raiding and PvP will always be staple forms of gameplay, but I do think something fun is needed for older players to stay interested in the game at this point. There's a lot of things they could add that have been successful in other Pokemon games. I've been saying this for a while now, but I do think Niantic should explore some sort of PvE gameplay that's centered around their current battle system. Sure, some would point to Team Go Rocket battles as this very thing, but why is there no Pokemon League or Elite Four feature in the game? Why is battling the team leaders Candela, Spark, and Blanc unrewarding and rather pointless? I think if they added some sort of tier or ladder system that coincides with PvE battles, it could add a fun new dynamic for hardcore and even casual players. They've also dabbled with trainer NPC battles in the past, and I really want them to build upon this even further. Like how players have a home gym, I think it would be a super neat idea to allow players to claim Pokestops. Maybe if there's a particular Pokestop that they interact with the most, they can sort of claim it as their home Pokestop, and select a few Pokemon to live there. This would essentially turn that Pokestop into one of those NPC battles, featuring you as the trainer that's battled. If your team loses a bunch of times, then someone else can take over that Pokestop. I don't know, these are just random ideas I'm throwing out there, but you get the idea. Number 4. Update the gym battling system. As I'm sure many of you are aware, The current gym battling system was not the original gym battling system that we had at the launch of Pokémon GO. The original system was more centered around the theme of turf wars and was seemingly way more competitive than the current system. While this did create many opportunities for toxic players to grief others, the current gym system feels more like a chore rather than engaging gameplay. Since players are encouraged to have their Pokémon knocked out of gyms in order to get their free Pokécoins, a lot of players are not motivated to take gyms in their area and claim towns for their teams like in the past. I think it goes without saying, whether you loved it or hated it, the old gym battling system was way more engaging and community driven. Now, I don't think it's in the game's best interest to bring back the old gym system into the current iteration of Pokémon GO, but I do think that the current gym system is outdated and just simply not fun. I do think that Niantic should explore updating the current system or consider doing another full rework. Number 5. Add more player control options, such as deleting unwanted eggs, better sorting and transferring options, etc. Out of all the things mentioned in this video, this is probably the one thing Niantic should prioritize first, as it's basically all about the player experience. Regardless if you're a casual player or hardcore player, having more and more control over your gameplay can go a very long way. I'm not just talking about quality of life changes, but just in general, we need more control options over our Pokemon collections, being able to delete eggs, different things like that. In regards to eggs specifically, many players have to jump through so many hoops in order to collect the specific eggs that they want, and to line up star pieces and lucky eggs for when they all hatch. Niantic should really give us plenty of control here. For starters, the functionality to get rid of unwanted eggs is long overdue. If all you care about is 10km eggs, then you should have the ability to remove all of the 2km and 5km eggs you pick up along the way. Another area where Niantic should give players more control is in regards to the friends list and gaining experience from leveling up your friendships. Every time you're about to hit Ultra or Best Friends with your mates, you both shouldn't have to negotiate a time and date to hit it. Niantic could simply allow players to collect those experience rewards at their pace, just like field research rewards. Once you hit Ultra or Best Friends with your friends, you could queue up those rewards that you can collect after popping a lucky egg at your own convenience. This takes away all the hoops you have to jump through, plus you don't risk losing out on a ton of experience just because one of your friends got impatient and didn't want to coordinate, or either of you weren't tracking your friendships correctly. There are plenty more aspects of needed player control I could get into, but that's all for now. Number 6. A better collection management system. Now here's something that isn't often talked about, but is probably one of the most prevalent issues when it comes to Pokemon GO. A lot of players struggle with what I call collection bloat, as in, they often have a ton of Pokemon in their Pokemon storage that they won't ever use in almost any circumstance, yet they can't seem to get rid of them for a variety of different reasons. I struggle with this very particular issue, in that I have several hundreds of Pokemon that are in a sense useless, yet I hold on to them for sentimental reasons. This has caused me to have issues of constantly running out of storage space, especially when it comes to major events like Pokemon Go Fest. I've made guide videos on how to properly manage your Pokemon storage, and it's something that almost every Pokemon Go content creator has touched upon. But I think it would be super beneficial if Niantic were to release some sort of Pokemon bank system into the game. Give players a way to clear up their storage without having to transfer sentimental Pokemon or some Pokemon that have a lot of potential in the future. I know there's already a function that allows you to transfer your Pokemon to Pokemon Home, but it is a one-way transfer and you can't get those Pokemon back into Pokemon Go. Why not have something similar, which will allow you to transfer back and forth your Pokemon into a bank of sorts? I think some functionality such as this could go a long way, especially for hardcore players. But you might be thinking to yourself that Niantic would never do this, considering the amount of money they must make when players upgrade their storage space. Well, you could have the bank be tied to your storage space, or you could have the functionality be behind an optional paywall. If people are willing to spend money to buy storage space, they would certainly be willing to buy bank space as well. To close out this point, I would also suggest if they were not going to implement a Pokemon bank system, then they could implement a system that allows you to label a Pokemon as active or inactive. That way, you could have your main Pokemon storage be all of your catches, but have a separate storage of Pokemon that you will actually use. Sure, you could do this already with tags, but maybe what they need to do is make tags have more functionality aside from just being another sorting tool. Number 7. Add more ways to get free-to-play Pokécoins. Free-to-play methods for getting premium currency, if done correctly, can actually be a driving force for revenue for any free-to-play game. Of course, you want to have premium purchases be completely optional, but encouraged. In the ideal scenario, you will want to give players just enough premium currency to enjoy the small things in your game, but if they want the absolute best of the best experiences, then they would have to pay a little money to get those experiences. In my opinion, Niantic has done this pretty well compared to other games. They've been able to generate a ton of revenue, but nothing in Pokémon GO is essentially blatantly pay to win. I know some players would disagree with me on this, but I do think Niantic has done better than most others. Now, even though I say that, they could most certainly do better. Several months ago, Niantic was testing out new ways for players to obtain free daily Pokécoins that involve completing various tasks throughout the day. In order to balance it out, they also implemented a huge nerf to the amount of Pokécoins you can get daily from gym battles. Predictably, players were not happy about this, and demanded that Niantic leave gym battles untouched, as the current gym system is already not fun and rewarding to begin with. But it seemed like Niantic didn't fully comprehend what the community was asking for here with this feedback. Players did enjoy the fact that you could get a few more Pokécoins per day for some different tasks. Well, tasks that didn't involve raiding at the very least, but Niantic decided to scrap the whole thing anyway. I really think Niantic should go back to what they were testing, but keep a much closer dialogue with the community on refining the system. Not only will it allow players to have better alternative methods for getting their daily free-to-play Pokécoins, but it could also add to daily engagement, which is a metric that is the lifeblood of a game like Pokémon GO. Number 8. Long Distance Lucky Trades. This one is pretty self-explanatory. One of the limiting mechanics to a pretty awesome feature is the requirement to be near another player to utilize that feature. Of course, I'm talking about hitting lucky friends and engaging in lucky trades. Now, I don't have a problem with requiring players to be near each other for regular trades. I think it strikes a certain level of game balance that having trades be restricted in some way allows for there to be a limit on just how much power a player could have. On the flip side, hitting lucky friends with your best friends is not something that happens often. It, in and of itself, is like hitting a small jackpot, as a lucky friend trade is a guaranteed 3-star Pokemon for yourself and your friend. The game is basically rewarding you for having daily interactions with your friends, but having the same restrictions vastly limits that sentiment. There are plenty of solutions that Niantic could implement without breaking that game balance that I was talking about earlier. Maybe you could have the trade distance be substantially longer for lucky trades only, or you could have the lucky trade distance be limitless, but you are only allowed one lucky trade per day. Whatever means they go with, what really needs to happen is having less restrictions for lucky friends and lucky trades at the very least. Number 9. More Pokémon customization, specifically around your buddy Pokémon. Something that was surprisingly enjoyable about Pokémon Let's Go Eevee and Let's Go Pikachu was the sheer amount of customization that you can do to your buddy Pokémon. Both of your buddy Eevee or Pikachu could have a variety of different looks, hairstyles, outfits, etc. This gave a sense of player agency that I didn't ever expect to be as fun as it ended up being. Now, having a similar level of customization for every single Pokemon they ever released and going to be released would be unfeasible, that much I recognize, but they should at least expand on what they currently already have, which is the buddy system. Something they could do right now is to allow a player to change out their best buddy medal that they can earn on their Pokemon. Maybe they can change the color or the design of it. Maybe they could add a feature that allows you to get different medals you can put on that Pokemon if you hit certain milestones with it. Like if you won 1,000 Go Battle League bouts with that specific Pokemon, you could put some kind of Go Battle League themed medal on it. Who knows, but the potential for some fun gameplay is definitely there. Also, remember those souvenirs that your buddy Pokemon could occasionally bring you after it is an Ultra Friend? Maybe you could choose one of those that your buddy could hold, as in you see that item on your Pokemon in some way. Who knows, but these sort of simpler solutions could go a very long way in driving player Pokemon customization, which, in and of itself, could add a level of added fun and player engagement that Let's Go Eevee and Let's Go Pikachu both enjoyed. And finally, number 10. Add more ways for rural and home-stuck players to gain items and Pokemon. Now, I've covered this topic across several videos in the past. It has been a prevalent issue since day one, that Pokémon GO is a very poor experience for players who are stuck at home for extended periods of time, or if they live in a low populated area. Of course, I have to point out that, as a byproduct of the pandemic, Niantic did implement several changes to Pokémon GO that vastly improves the player experience for rural and homestuck players. Getting items is not as problematic as before, since you can effectively stock up on at least the basic items through opening gifts. You can also even raid remotely thanks to the introduction of the Remote Raid Pass, but I do think that Niantic still has a long way to go. I do believe Niantic is fully capable of making the game more friendly towards rural players. We've seen several mechanics in other games like Harry Potter Wizards Unite, yet we've never seen similar features make their way to Pokémon GO. I do think Niantic needs to continue looking into various solutions to help rural players get a much better experience. Even as the game is right now, most rural players will resort to using cheats and hacks, even though the game has improved a lot over the years. Niantic could hit two birds with one stone, vastly reducing the amount of cheaters in Pokémon GO and opening up the game for more people. In order to do this, they need to continuously add more ways for rural players to get close to the same experience that urban and suburban players get on a daily basis. Out of all of the things I mentioned on this list, this is the one thing that could make or break Pokémon GO in the near future. So long as Niantic continuously keeps rural players in mind, they could ensure the longevity of this game. Alright, so there you have it. These were the 10 things that I believe Pokémon GO desperately needs. I really hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, do me a favor and hit that like button. And if it's your first time here, please hit that subscribe button, and don't forget that little bell as well. And I am Count Jinsula. Be safe, have fun, love yourself, and I will catch you all later.